They said a Muslim could never rise in New York politics. They said the wealthy controlled everything. They said the people had no voice. They were wrong. The city of New York moved like it was always rushing somewhere, always hungry, always chasing something unseen. Towers of silver glass stabbed the sky, the subway roared beneath cracked sidewalks, and crowds swarmed like currents in a river no one could ever stop. But for all its noise and ambition, the city had two faces. One glittered, polished by billionaires, donors, and the powerful elite who lived in penthouses so high they couldn't hear the city's heartbeat. The other face was raw, real, bruised by struggle, found in corner stores, bus stops, overcrowded apartments, and late-night diners where exhaustion lived in the eyes of the people. And somewhere between these two worlds walked a man named Mamdani. He was no politician, no businessman, no legacy heir to power. He was a son of the city's worn streets, raised in a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered, where the rent rose faster than paychecks, where hope was something you learned to protect like a fragile flame. Mamdani didn't begin as a leader. He began as a listener. He listened to the mothers working two jobs, to the elders forgotten by the system, to the teenagers staring at futures blocked by invisible gates. He heard their anger, their laughter, their disappointments, their dreams. And one night, in a community hall with peeling paint and broken chairs, he stood and spoke not like a politician, but like someone who had lived the same storms. If the system was built to ignore us, he said, then we must build something of our own. The room fell silent, not because his words were loud, but because they were true. Word spread, not through news stations or advertisements, but through front porches, prayer halls, basketball courts, grocery aisles, barber shops. People didn't follow him because they were told to. They followed because he spoke what they already knew but had never heard spoken aloud. Across the river, high in glass towers, the wealthy noticed. Among them was a circle known only through whispers, the network. 20 billionaires whose money flowed into elections, police contracts, private security firms, media corporations, and quiet offshore accounts. And above them stood a president who owed them everything. President Holt did not fear elections. He feared movements, and Mamdani was no candidate. He was momentum. He is dangerous, one of the billionaires said during a private dinner where wine cost more than a working family's monthly income. He's nothing, another replied. Just a community voice. They always fade. But Mamdani didn't fade. He grew. His speeches filled streets. His message traveled online. People who had given up now began to imagine change like a flame returning to cold hands. And the network knew something must be done. They sent analysts, strategists, whisperers skilled in planting doubt. They searched for secrets to expose, mistakes to exploit, scandals to fabricate. But Mamdani's life was ordinary, honest, transparent. He did not hide because he had nothing to hide. So they changed tactics. They sent someone to stand beside him. A smiling, humble volunteer named Jalen Voss. Jalen brought energy, ideas, sincerity. He showed up early and stayed late. He learned how the movement worked, who influenced who, where the cracks were. And the city continued waking. A man with no power had stirred the ground beneath the powerful. The network realized something. If the people believed they had the right to shape their city, then wealth would no longer rule. So they decided to strike first. While Mamdani and his followers launched neighborhood cleanups, job clinics, and midnight food drives, the network prepared a different kind of operation. One built not of guns or threats, but of fear and illusion. President Holt went on national television and spoke words wrapped in velvet and poison. We must be cautious, he warned. There are rising voices that claim to represent the people but threaten security and unity. He never said Mamdani's name. He didn't need to. The message was planted like a seed. Soon newspapers hinted, talk shows questioned, rumors spread, and yet, Mamdani did not fall. He stood taller, because the people had seen enough lies to recognize the truth when it finally arrived. And the truth was this: a Muslim man from a forgotten neighborhood had awakened the city. And the city was listening. The fire on East Harbor Street changed everything. It started in the basement of an old apartment building, a place where families lived packed into rooms too small for their dreams. The flames rose fast, devouring wood, wires, furniture, memory. Smoke curled through the stairwells as sirens wailed, too late, always too late in neighborhoods where emergency response was a suggestion, not a promise. Mamdani was there that night, not as a hero but as a neighbor. He carried an elderly man down 2 flights of stairs. He shielded a crying child with his own coat. When the flames were finally beaten back, the building was a charred skeleton open to the cold sky. News cameras came in the morning, not to ask how the fire happened, but to ask how the people would go on. They expected despair. Instead, the people gathered around the blackened bricks, and Mamdani stood before them with soot on his face and resolve in his eyes. "This city burns our homes and calls it fate," he said. "But fate is not written. We write it, together." The crowd didn't cheer. They listened, and in that listening, something ancient awakened. Power without permission. It was then the idea formed, not in Mamdani's mind, but in the minds of the people around him. They asked him to run for mayor. He refused at first. "I am no politician," he said. "Exactly," they answered. The movement was not about titles. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen by the network, those 20 billionaires who controlled contracts, media, policing, elections, and even the president himself. The current mayor, Philip Crane, was one of their polished puppets. He spoke smoothly of prosperity while entire neighborhoods disappeared under luxury developments. When Mamdani announced his candidacy, the city shuddered. The powerful laughed softly, like wolves who believed they still held the leash. They had tools for situations like this: manipulation, media warfare, manufactured scandals, and they had Jalen. He had spent years quietly climbing inside the movement, gaining trust, becoming indispensable. And when the mayoral debate came, Jalen made his move. The auditorium was filled with cameras, lights, and the restless tension of a city deciding its future. Mayor Crane spoke in perfect soundbites. Mamdani spoke in truth. The audience leaned toward him like plants toward sunlight. And then the moderator introduced the accusation, a claim that Mamdani's brother had been caught in illegal dealings. The room tightened like a fist. Mamdani answered with calm honesty. The charges were fabricated, leverage from those afraid of losing control. And then Jalen stood. Every camera found him as if on command. His voice trembled with just the right amount of pain. He said he had been loyal, that he believed in the movement, but he could no longer hide the truth. He claimed Mamdani's brother was guilty. That Mamdani had known. The betrayal was a knife. The crowd gasped. The media exploded. The network celebrated. But Mamdani did not break. He simply looked at Jalen, with eyes that held sorrow instead of hatred, and said, "I forgive you." Those words did what accusations could not. They revealed the difference between them. Jalen was a tool. Mamdani was a man. And the city saw. Days later, Jalen was found dead. A suicide, the police report claimed, but the city knew better. The network had erased its own pawn. The city erupted, not in violence, but awakening. People marched, not with signs, but with understanding. The debate was no longer about a candidate. It was about who owned the city, the wealthy few, or the people who built it. The network panicked. Mason Wren called for the final solution. Remove Mamdani entirely, not politically, physically. One cold night, Mamdani walked alone through the neighborhood that had raised him. A sniper waited in a dark window. His finger tightened, but the bullet did not land. A young man from the movement saw the glint of the rifle and shoved Mamdani behind a parked truck just in time. Gunshots shattered the quiet. The chase tore through streets as sirens, footsteps, and shouts filled the night air. The attack failed, but the truth could not be contained. A girl filmed the shooting from her fire escape. The video spread online faster than any news network could spin a lie. The people saw with their own eyes. They tried to kill him. They tried to silence him. They tried to end what the city had become. By dawn, New Torque was in the streets. Not protesting, protecting, claiming. The chants rose like thunder rolling across concrete and steel. "We are the city. We are the future. Mamdani lives." Even police officers lowered shields because the crowd was not a crowd. It was the city itself. Election day arrived like a storm and a sunrise. Lines wrapped around blocks. People waited in freezing air just to cast a single vote. Not for a man, for themselves. And when the results finally appeared on screens across the city, the world changed. Mamdani, elected mayor of New Torque. The cheers were not cheers. They were a roar older than nations. A sound of people who had remembered their power. Mamdani stepped forward, humbled by the weight of the moment. "This is not my victory," he said. "This is ours. The city belongs to you." The crowd lifted their hands, their voices, their futures. And then he smiled with warmth that belonged not to a politician, but to someone who had always belonged to them. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Which city, or which state? I want to know who is standing with us tonight. The victory did not bring silence. It brought a new kind of storm. Power does not disappear just because the people have awakened. It recoils, regroups, sharpens its teeth in the shadows. The network was wounded, not defeated. 20 billionaires watched the celebration from rooms filled with glass, marble, and quiet rage. President Holt stared at the election results alone in the Oval Office, the glow of the television flickering across his face like the reflection of a fire he could not put out. The phone lines among the elite burned with whispered plans. They had lost the city, but the country was still theirs. "We starve the city," one of them said. "Cut funding, freeze infrastructure, let the people turn against him. He cannot lead if the city cannot function. Let him drown in his own victory." And so the silent war began. Suddenly, budgets that were once easily approved stalled in government offices. Federal grants vanished. Corporate donors withdrew support from schools, clinics, housing projects. News anchors spoke in calm, polished voices about the unexpected administrative slowdown and economic uncertainty brought on by new leadership. They wanted the city to suffer so the city would regret choosing itself. But the city did not bend. Neighborhoods formed supply lines. Restaurants cooked meals at cost. Teachers pooled resources. Transit workers repaired trains with reclaimed parts. What they didn't have, they shared. What they couldn't afford, they built together. The city that had once been divided by class, by culture, by fear, was now united by survival and purpose. Power had changed hands without permission, and that terrified those who once believed control was eternal. Inside City Hall, Mamdani worked without rest. He slept in short fragments, sometimes on a couch, sometimes on his office floor, surrounded by maps, budgets, letters, voices. His staff, once small, now included people who had never dreamed of working in government: nurses, electricians, students, organizers, mothers who could negotiate with the precision of diplomats because they had spent their lives managing chaos that politicians never understood. They weren't polished, they weren't trained, but they were real, and real was stronger. Yet something darker loomed. Mason Wren watched all of this unfold with the cold patience of someone who still believed he had the final move. He no longer spoke loudly or threatened openly. He simply watched, waiting, because the true battle was not for the city. It was for the belief that this victory could spread. If one city could break their grip, others might follow. Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles, Houston, Atlanta, and beyond the nation's borders, millions more who had felt invisible might recognize themselves in Mamdani's rise. A spark in a single city could become a world catching fire. So the network chose its next battlefield, the narrative. They began telling a new story, one crafted with careful language and polished fear. They said Mamdani was too radical, too inexperienced, too emotional. They said his leadership was causing instability. They said New Torque was becoming unpredictable. They didn't need truth. They needed doubt. Doubt spreads faster than belief. And they had media to carry it. But the city did not break. It did something much more dangerous. It started telling its own story. Taxi drivers told riders. Teachers told students. Shop owners told customers. Artists painted murals across brick walls. Musicians wrote songs that filled the subway tunnels like heartbeat rhythms. Stories traveled, not through screens, but through people. And stories carried by people cannot be erased. Still, Mamdani understood that victory was not secure. The network was not defeated. It was evolving, and there was a new rumor rising. They were preparing to remove him through legal channels: impeachment, fabricated scandal, federal intervention, whatever door opened first. The presidency itself was now in play. The people were watching, not with fear, but with expectation. They no longer wanted a mayor. They wanted a leader who could reshape the nation. But Mamdani never chased power. He chased justice. And justice was not a throne, it was a burden. Late one night, alone in his office, he stood at the window overlooking the city. Lights glimmered like a blanket of stars fallen to earth. He felt both tiny and limitless, one voice among millions, carried by them and carrying them. He whispered to the city as if it could hear him. "We will not lose what we have awakened. We have come too far. We are not done." Behind him, a door clicked open. Footsteps entered slowly, not hostile, familiar. A woman who had stood with him from the beginning. Her voice was soft, tired, steady. "They're moving again," she said. "Not on the streets. In Washington." Mamdani turned toward her. He did not ask how she knew. He simply nodded. "Then we move too," he said. The next battle was no longer about winning one city. It was about changing the country. And the country was watching. Tell me something before I continue. Which state or city are you watching from? I want to imagine your place as part of this story.